What's your case worth? Whether you're here just to get information because you think you might have a case or you're already one of my clients, you're in the right place. My name is Justin Schneider, also known as the Honest Attorney. I'm a personal injury attorney in Florida, and I've handled just about every kind of case you can think of, from car accidents, slip and falls, to drownings and wrongful death, you name it. If someone gets hurt because of someone else's negligence, there's a good chance I've dealt with that. I tell you the truth, I tell you what it is, even if it's not what most lawyers are willing to say. And in this video, I'm going to break down the exact 3 factors that determine which your personal injury case is worth. The first factor in any personal injury case is liability. In plain terms, who's at fault? If you can't prove that someone else caused the accident or your injuries, doesn't matter how serious your injuries are. You don't have a case, it's 100% your fault. That's why liability is step 1, but it's not as straightforward as that. Let me give you an example. You're stopped at a red light and someone rear-ends you. That's usually a clear-cut case. You're not at fault. If that went to the jury, they likely find the other driver 100% at fault. That means whatever your case is worth, you'll get 100% of it. But not every case is as straightforward. Sometimes fault is shared. Maybe both drivers did something wrong. Maybe there were multiple cars involved. Or in a slip and fall, maybe there's a question about whether or not you were paying attention and contributed to the accident. In Florida, we use something called comparative fault. That means that liability and damages are shared between everyone. So if your case is worth $100,000, but you're found to be 50% at fault, your recovery is reduced to $50,000. The more blame you carry, the less your case is worth. And here's something critical. In Florida, if you're found to be more than 50% at fault, you recover 0. In some states, you can still recover even if you're 80% at fault. And even going 5 or 10 miles per hour over the speed limit can come into play. So remember, the more fault on your side, the less your case is worth, even if your injuries are severe. That's why liability is always step 1 and one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. Next up is a big one: insurance or money. And this part is critical because you could have a case that's worth $10 million on paper, but if there's no one to collect from, no money to collect, that value doesn't mean anything. Let's use car accidents as an example, since they're the most common and easiest to understand. In any car crash case, we typically sue both the driver and the owner of the vehicle that caused the accident. But here's the problem: most people don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting around or even enough to cover your medical bills. So it doesn't matter how bad your injuries are or how strong your case is. If there's no money to recover and no one to go after, your recovery could be limited. That's why most personal injury attorneys just focus on insurance coverage, because that's money they can actually collect. If the other driver is at fault, their insurance company is legally required to pay for your injuries, medical bills, and damages, but only up to the amount of that policy. And if the other person only has a $10,000 policy, that's all the insurance company is responsible for, whether or not they killed someone. However, with big companies, this usually isn't a concern, because when you're dealing with a big company, they're collectible. For example, Uber and Lyft both carry at least $1 million in insurance coverage for accidents involving their drivers. Trucking companies are federally required to carry at least $750,000 in insurance coverage, and many carry more. And companies like Walmart, Pepsi, and others, well, they're worth billions. So even if their insurance policy isn't enough to cover all the damages, they have money to pay out of pocket. Now here's where it gets tricky. Let's say you lose a leg in an accident. Your medical bills could cost $1 million alone, but the person who hit you only has $100,000 in coverage and no assets. That's all there may be to collect. So remember, it's not about the size of your case, it's about who you're going after, what's available, and whether it's actually collectible. That's why knowing the insurance company is so important, because in most cases, insurance can act as a cap on what your case is worth. Before we dive into the next part, if you're finding this helpful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. I post real legal tips that you won't hear from most lawyers, and they could make a huge difference if you ever need them. But alright, let's get back to it. Last, and maybe the most important factor, is damages. Because at the end of the day, every personal injury case is built on damages. What happened to you, what it cost you, and how it changed your life. When we're talking about damages, we're talking about things like how much were your medical bills, how much will your bills be in the future, how severe are your injuries, will you recover quickly or have a lifelong disability. But here's the problem: you often don't know the full extent of your damages right away. Unlike catastrophic cases where someone dies or loses a limb, those damages are huge and calculable at the start. However, in a lot of cases, you may not know how bad your injuries are for several months. Some injuries can heal over time, and it can be difficult to tell early on if your injuries are temporary or permanent. Or you may try to tough it out for months and then realize you need surgery later on. Surgery matters because it dramatically increases your medical expenses. It adds significant pain and suffering because surgery is painful, and it's considered strong proof that your injury was serious and life-altering, and in some cases can prove that it's a permanent injury. So let's say you have 2 people who have the exact same injury. a herniated disc in the neck. One person decides to live with the pain, the other person undergoes a spinal surgery that costs $300,000. Who do you think the insurance company will pay more to? The one who has $300,000 in medical bills. Insurance companies don't care if your doctor recommends surgery, they only care if you actually get it. And if you don't, they're going to argue your pain isn't that bad. I've literally had insurance companies say if it was really bad, why didn't they get the surgery? Besides medical bills, damages can also include your past lost wages, your future lost wages if you can't return to work, future medical bills, loss of spousal support, just to name a few. But just like medical bills, these often take time to develop. You won't know how much work you've missed just 2 weeks after the accident. And future medical bills can sometimes be hard to determine if all you've done is gone to the hospital because the accident happened last week. But one of the most important ones is pain and suffering. At trial, the jury is literally asked to put a dollar amount on how much pain you endured. But here's the catch. Pain is different to every person. You can't just say my back hurts and expect a 7-figure settlement. You need proof, medical proof, consistent treatment, and a paper trail to support what you're feeling. Because it doesn't matter how much pain you're in, defense attorneys and insurance companies are never going to believe you. And the truth is, pain and suffering usually tracks closely with your medical care. That's why you rarely see someone with $10,000 in medical bills getting a $1 million settlement. Because honestly, what does $10,000 in medical bills really get you? Maybe one ER visit and an x-ray? If you're really in pain, people expect you to follow through with every doctor's recommendation. Go to physical therapy, get MRIs, and do everything in your power to recover. If you don't, it doesn't just hurt your health, it can hurt your case. Because the defense will use that against you to say that you weren't actually following your doctor's orders. So to wrap this up, damages are what determine the value of your case, but they can sometimes take time to develop. And that's why I never guess at a case value on day one. And any attorney who tells you what your case is worth right away is likely not telling you the truth. For example, let's say the defendant has a $1 million insurance policy. That means they can pay up to $1 million. But the real question is, are your injuries and losses worth that much? And at the start of the case, we just usually don't know. That's why we track your progress, we gather your records, and we make sure every surgery, every bill, every ounce of pain is documented and accounted for. Because that's what it takes to make sure you get what you truly deserve. And remember, just because you saw a smiling face on a billboard holding a $1 million check, that doesn't mean that person didn't go through hell to get it. You can't see the surgeries or brain injuries in a photo. So to wrap it up, you have to consider all three factors: liability, coverage, and damages. Doesn't matter how bad your injuries are, you're at fault for the accident, or the person responsible doesn't have money or insurance, your case could be worth zero. Alternatively, you could get rear-ended by an Uber driver who has $1 million in coverage. It's their fault, but all you did over the next year was go to an urgent care once. It's not going to be worth zero, but it's not really going to be worth much because clearly you weren't really injured. If you were injured, you probably would have gotten more medical treatment. It doesn't mean you don't have a case. You still went through pain and it still wasn't your fault, and that's still worth something. That's likely not a $1 million case. That's why choosing the right firm matters. Some lawyers settle fast, they take the first offer. We don't. We go deeper, we build the case, investigate thoroughly, and fight for everything you deserve. If you have questions or you've been hurt and want an honest opinion, reach out. I'm here to help. And follow The Honest Attorney for more legal tips, because I'll tell you what the other lawyers won't and don't want you to know.